Keys and Kingdoms is one of the settings we're creating for the Aegis game system. We have no structure currently in place for the actual system, but the setting aims to combine your classic D&D style high fantasy with the vibes of a Disney-esque animated fairy tale musical, though generally with adult theming. Unless you run a campaign that's appropriate for children, you can do that, we're not doing that. This series of videos, using the only medium in which I can properly express myself, Microsoft PowerPoint, will show off the 10 Keys and Kingdoms core rules, people, and the manner in which we're interpreting them in our 5th edition homebrew campaign. Using the original 5e rules from 10 years ago, not the new ones, we don't have time to learn to master subtle differences to the system. It's going to be all about the imagination and telling a story in this world we're building. The gaming world is changing in the way it represents the fantasy creature you can choose to be, and while I'm on board with it, I feel the concept is being handled with a bit more delicacy than it strictly needs, namely more than the necessary conflation with real-world issues of race. Such comparisons would have occurred to most people eventually regardless, but I'd say a big factor was that they were actually called races. I guess blame Gygax or maybe Tolkien. Were they called races in Tolkien's works? I don't remember. Anyway, it's not really comparable except as allegory, and racial allegory has to be done incredibly well if it's going to work at all. The whole renegade dark elf thing never really taught the right lessons, you know? So for starters, they're retiring the term race as it's used in the gaming world. Some games are going with ancestry or lineage, which to me sounds equally loaded and horrible. I just picture snooty aristocrats sneering about people's ancestry and lineage. Species would be the accurate term, and seems to be what 5.5 is going with, and when that sounds too cold and clinical, I go with people, as in different peoples living together in harmony. Like I said, I'm mostly on board with RPGs removing certain implications from your species selection that feel uncomfortable. Saying that a certain race is poorly suited for a certain profession is, of course, a horrible thing to say. On the other hand, some games seem to be aiming to make your people not make a difference at all, which I think is the wrong direction. The key to all this, I feel, is to make all species features either physiological or supernatural, never cultural. Cultural stuff is for backgrounds and feats and such, whatever equivalent to those he just ends up with. For instance, all the high elf traits imply they're the result of superior high elf education. That's not cool. They should be more magical because they're innately more magical, not because their culture is supposedly better. Cultural norms should be suggested, I feel like the game stopped doing that, but be entirely optional. Yeah, they're having species do nothing for your stats now, that's just silly. And so, let's talk about our first species, humans themselves. Generally treated as the default by RPGs, I had my own ideas for flavor. Here's all the sample humans I've commissioned. I encourage all players, especially human players, not to restrict themselves to a medieval European aesthetic. Don't be a brat if a character's apparent ethnicity is incongruous with their apparent nationality and culture. People travel, people's ancestors travel, always have. That's all the justification you need. Fuck you. I also strongly encourage different body types and sexual and gender identities. I would discourage unusual colorations. Stick to human skin, eye, and hair colors. Non-human colors are for non-human characters. So let's talk stats, both the flavor I'm going for and how I'll interpret it for 5e. Aegis humans shall be of medium size and typical medium speed. The characteristics of Aegis humans stand on 5 legs. 5 things that make humans different from most other animals in real life shall be things that make them different from most other people in this world. The first is the most obvious, our minds. Humans certainly won't be implied to be more intelligent than other people, but the creativity, adaptability, and flexibility that distinguishes humans, both in real life and in most RPGs, shall be the case here as well. In Aegis, well, we haven't figured out how skills and feats and such work yet, but in this 5th edition adaptation, human versatility will comprise the stats of the variant human in the core rules. +1 to 2 ability scores of your choice, 1 extra skill, and 1 feat. Then, endurance. It's been largely forgotten since the advent of agriculture, but humans are persistence predators, taking down prey by following them around indefinitely. There's not much call for endurance in 5th edition, but let's say they can travel for 12 hours a day instead of the typical 8. Not sure that'll come into play in anyone's game, but there you have it. And then there's aim. Humans have keen aim with thrown objects, giving them a +1 bonus to attacks with thrown weapons, including improvised ones. In other RPGs, it's halflings who are good with thrown weapons. There are no halflings in the Keys and Kingdoms world, but in Aegis settings where they are around, I'd give them a +2 bonus, in theory. So it's still a human thing, but more of a halfling thing. Bonuses like that are rare in 5e in favor of the advantage-disadvantage mechanic, but it seemed the best way to represent a slight advantage. Now, that's it for actual human stats. The fourth thing is sex. There won't be any rules for sex, this isn't that kind of RPG, but they'll have a whispered reputation throughout the Aegis multiverse for being particularly good lovers and well-endowed in whichever way you prefer. There are many ways in which that's a human thing, so that'll be a human thing. And the fifth thing, well, the fifth thing won't be a thing at all. It's longevity. I knew right away that wouldn't work. Everybody knows, even if they know nothing about fantasy, that elves and dwarves and dragons live much longer than humans do. So our century-long lifespan shall remain an average to short lifespan for a person, rather than a long one for an animal. Creature type for humans is, of course, humanoid. Aegis will use the same 14 creature types as seen in 5th edition because it's a good system, but there'll be a lot more rules and intricacies surrounding it because I like classifying things. Language feels like one cultural thing that makes sense to bake into creature stats, and I feel it makes sense with a versatility trait for human players to, by the book, speak common and one other language of the player's choice. And if you're into alignment, humans retain the any alignment. Like most people, humans are basically good, but they're susceptible to corruption and temptation, so, far more so than anyone else, humans can have any temperament, heroic, villainous, or anywhere in between. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned for more vids on the peoples of Keys and Kingdoms.